Hello everyone, my name is Bill Prater, and I would like to briefly talk to you about one of the concepts that we have been covering in our Teacher for Communications class, 550 here at Liberty University. Specifically, I would like to talk to you about teacher misbehavior and a theory known as attribution theory. Um, and basically, what's happening here is that I want to talk to you about three specific things. I want to talk to you about the setup, the classroom environment, and the need for attribution theory. I'd like to talk to you about some of the research that goes along with it, and then what I believe to be some perceived issues with it, and then some future work that we can do, and finally finish it up with a Christian worldview. So basically, whenever we're in a situation, whether it's a school environment or a work environment, a family environment, a relationship environment, we have certain expectations. In the classroom, the students have expectations of us, and we have expectations of the students. These students expect us to behave a certain way in a certain fashion. And anytime we step outside of the norm, so to speak, that's known as a teacher misbehavior. Now, don't get confused by the word misbehavior. Misbehavior just means that you're acting in a way that's not expected. It doesn't have to be a negative connotation. It could be a positive connotation. Giving a reward out when one isn't expected, or doing something positive. But basically, anytime a student sees a teacher do something that they're not expecting them to do, that is a teacher misbehavior, and ultimately these students have to find some reason why it happened. The research states that there are basically three reasons why the reasons that they'll assign. That the situation that we were in dictated doing something different than was expected. It was some sort of chance, meaning something happened at the last minute that no one was expecting to happen, or it's just the disposition of the teacher that is different than what normal expectations of teachers would be. There's two categories of misbehavior. The first is external factors, and what the research shows is that external factors of attribution theory and teacher misbehavior are ones that students can usually overcome. So that means something of fate. So a teacher is late to a college class. It's a rare occurrence, and it's because they were caught behind an accident on the highway. Or something happened in the family that was uncontrollable and forced them to be absent or late. It's a factor that doesn't happen very often. It's outside of the teacher control, but it gives them a reason and that they're okay with it. Internal factors are more of our personality traits. So taking the late instance, I'm late, but I'm late because I just didn't want to be there. This may not be the case, but if I don't vocalize a reason for being late, this is very possibly the behavior that the student thinks that we're taking, and they believe that that's controllable, and they're less forgiving on something that's controllable, because if we are late to something, we typically don't want to be there, and so they say, well, the teacher must not want to be in the classroom. And that's where attribution theory comes in. Basically, attribution theory puts attributes or characteristics on why a misbehavior in the classroom existed. It gives us this need for explanation. We need to know why they acted in a way different than what we expected. And this is important because we are always constantly giving off verbal and nonverbal messages. We've learned that in other classes. If you've taken other communication courses at all, you know that we're always giving off some sort of communication. And students are expected to give the appropriate response in a classroom. It's not a situation where we can avoid communication. And they want to give the most appropriate message, and in order to do so, they have to understand why we gave our message, and so they have to attribute something to that theory. Now, the research shows that basically there are lots of reasons why we do what we do and commit the misbehaviors we do, because misbehaviors are going to happen whether they're intentional or unintentional. Some of the research that I have been able to find, for instance, is that knowledge of content is rarely an issue for misbehavior. It's our classroom management skills. I myself am a teacher, so I went through an undergrad education program at Miami University, and what we found out pretty much is you can talk about all the classroom management skills and how to handle things, but ultimately you're going to learn in the classroom, and that's going to be something you learn on the fly. So you will typically mimic what other teachers do that you know. or that you had that you deemed to be successful. That may not work for you. And so even though it's a learned trait, it doesn't work for you, and you commit more quote unquote misbehaviors or mistakes. Um, we often will give a misinterpretation of needed response. The way a student acts, the way we commit the misbehavior, we think that we're supposed to give a certain response to get what we want back on track, because ultimately we have the goal of educating and they have the goal of learning, and these two goals do match up. And so we give a response that we believe to be appropriate. It's not actually appropriate. Um, another issue that I find with this is it gives us we don't have this ability to venture from the norm. Um, they have certain expectations for teachers. I don't know if you've thought this, but as a teacher myself, a lot of students are surprised to see me outside of the school, because they just assume I'm there, I live there, and I couldn't possibly grocery shop or eat at a restaurant. They just don't make that connection. And so they have these strong expectations of what they expect a teacher to be. So if you want to do something successful, the attribution theory, they've attributed these characteristics to you, and it makes it extremely difficult to actually do something that is different. Not that it can't be done, but it just makes it more difficult. Lastly, with health-related issues, we deal with a lot of students who are on IEPs, which stands for Individual Educational Plans, or 504 plans that are much more health-related. And so when you hear about a student who is diabetic, or you hear about a student who has autism, you automatically associate a certain trait. And while there may be similar characteristics, each situation has to be handled differently. But we hear that and we act in a certain way, and quite often commit misbehaviors because each student is different. Just like you wouldn't teach any student the same way, you can't do it that way as well. Some pitfalls that I believe with it is stereotypes. You put students into a certain situation and you expect them all to behave a certain way based on a certain gender or a certain race, or a certain classroom setting. And students are unique just like we're unique, and so we need to try to be as unique as possible. Obviously, we're teaching a large group of people at a time in a classroom setting. You can't be completely unique, but you want to be as unique as you possibly can. You have these stigmatisms. Again, that goes back a lot to health-related issues, where we stigmatize individuals for acting a certain way and we expect them to act a certain way. So we have these misbehaviors on them, and when they don't, we commit the misbehaviors as well. We also misinterpret our responses, and so we'll make inaccurate responses because we don't know enough about the student. And I think, much like anything, when we look to the future and try to do more research on this is a very untapped, in my opinion, theory, because it falls a lot under the psychological and sociological fields. But I believe it's a strong communication field as well, and one that we really haven't delved into enough. Um, just like anything, we can train to be certain responses. We have to be able to train ourselves to be very aware of what we're doing and to give appropriate responses based on the stimuli. We're never going to be completely right, and you're never going to eliminate misbehaviors. But if we train ourselves to believe a certain way, we should be completely fine. Second, make our responses conscious. Try not to react, and that's very difficult because we're humans and we have emotions, and we may be having a bad day because of a fight we had with a spouse. We say to leave it out of the classroom, but we don't always do so. But we have to do everything we can in order to do that, so that we make a conscious response, so that we give the message we truly intend to, and not one we don't, which makes it even harder for the student to interpret. Finally, under the biblical worldview, I'm not specifically going to talk about speaking to the Bible in the classroom because I teach in public education, but basically I look at this in two different ways. His word is magnificent, and that's what we're trying to exhibit here. And so what we have to do is not commit misbehaviors in my thinking, in two different ways. One, we have a worldview, and I believe most of you who are watching will have a similar biblical worldview, but we still interpret the Bible, we interpret our readings similarly. So we can't just assume that everyone with the biblical worldview believes the exact same things. We all believe in Him and we have faith in Him, but we have different ways of looking at things. And so we have to have a little variety in that as well, knowing that we're all still reaching the same goal. It's the same way in the educational classroom. Second of all, when we're dealing with people who do not have that Christian ideal, we still have to be able to interpret them and bring in our ideals and understand them to some extent and understand the world from which they come, so that we can interpret them as well. So ultimately, What it comes down to, I think, with attribution theory is to be very conscious and aware. I hope in this 10 minutes, as it's just went over 10 minutes, that I've been able to give you a little bit, very briefly, on a theory that I think needs a lot more investigation, and I look forward to your responses. Have a great rest of the 2 weeks of our class.